the library. That's good. Don't ask me. No, that's it. Just have to. What do you say? It's so bad. No, finance. I need it. What? Let's just the writing person.
That's what you need to bring out.
Okay, just check those in answers.
What's it? It's so bad.
No, finance.
I need it.
What? Let's just the writing person.
That's what you need to bring out.
Okay, just check those in answers.
What's it?
That's because writing isn't an object, Captain.
Oh, good. That's a lot.
Hey. Tell me what I can do to help.
Well, you can get me straight on the cycle and then tell me what you want to solve.
They're not really statistic anyway.
But I thought that was
I need to make certain categories to pride understand, but reality writing's all one process.
All right,
There's pre-writing, writing,
so the first step,
that's basically what we've been doing. Don't get into the puzzling and the second thing.
so I haven't just been a wizard.
Not at all. It's essential.
And the second step is writing.
That's what you're doing. You write it on paper and come up with the first draft.
And that is revising.
Read, vision. Things are working on.
For the first draft.
Much that first draft means you have things. You see, you don't do the second, you down into the second. Things a lot better. You just have to keep working. You can submit that there's one single right way that automatically.
And then tell me what you want to solve.
They're not really statistic anyway.
But I thought that was
I need to make certain categories to pride understand, but reality writing's all one process.
all right,
There's pre-writing, writing,
so the first step,
that's basically what we've been doing. Don't get into the puzzling and the second thing.
so I haven't just been a wizard.
Not at all. It's essential.
And the second step is writing.
That's what you're doing. You write it on paper and come up with the first draft.
And that is revising.
Read, vision. Things are working on.
For the first draft.
Much that first draft means you have things. You see, you don't do the second, you down into the second. Things a lot better. You just have to keep working. You can submit that there's one single right way that automatically turns it.
But if I do that, still
Oh, you didn't fly out. Okay, and you start sorting those categories according to idea. Then after you sort them, you could according to I understand them.
I see what you mean.
When they and I were discussing how to handle this material, she said just like the major categories. I asked somebody about writing it was and so she suggested that I like these myths.
You just have to keep working. You can submit that there's one single right way that automatically turns it.
But if I do that, still
Oh, you didn't fly out. Okay, and you start sorting those categories according to idea. Then after you sort them, you could according to I understand them.
I see what you mean.
when they and I were discussing how to handle this material, she said just like the major categories. I asked somebody about writing it was and so she suggested that I like these myths. Well, I was looking at before. I'm going to read the narrative with respect to evidence and back to narration. So I've also had some little papers to go over you. It goes, I'm missing something called the mystery myth. Many people new to writing believe that it's so mysterious it can't be taught or learned. There's people with an inborn talent for writing, they're controlling the dark. However, even though inborn talent, their talent is really hard to picture.
I don't give in terms of use, but a lot of insights that we have are almost serendipitous. But I mean, they're also subject matters.
One of the things I think inexperienced writers think writing is that, as you're said, indeed, writers engage in process.
When they and I were discussing how to handle this material, she said just like the major categories. I asked somebody about writing it was and so she suggested that I like these myths. Well, I was looking at before. I'm going to read the narrative with respect to evidence and back to narration. So I've also had some little papers to go over you. It goes, I'm missing something called the mystery myth. Many people new to writing believe that it's so mysterious it can't be taught or learned. There's people with an inborn talent for writing, they're controlling the dark. However, even though inborn talent, their talent is really hard to picture.
I don't give in terms of use, but a lot of insights that we have are almost serendipitous. But I mean, they're also subject matters.
One of the things I think inexperienced writers think writing is that, as you're said, indeed, writers engage in process from which are excluded, and they have no way of entering into it. There's some very powerful strategies that writers can be taught master before they can control all the coaches and things.
I think the myth says that you say for several years I've been saying, experienced writers don't stand up, just don't come deep. But you look at it and work through it.
Another wonderful man who's called quite often on this, and he always mentions during the course, we got resident for $60 a month. There's a vicinity that you write to, and you get 2 writers a week. And with them, Superman, the others crowd around. Oh, by the way, can I have the address of the place next to Benny Red? And where the ladies come from,
They're also subject matters.
One of the things I think inexperienced writers think writing is that, as you're said, indeed, writers engage in process from which are excluded, and they have no way of entering into it. There's some very powerful strategies that writers can be taught master before they can control all the coaches and things.
I think the myth says that you say for several years I've been saying, experienced writers don't stand up, just don't come deep. But you look at it and work through it.
Another wonderful man who's called quite often on this, and he always mentions during the course, we got resident for $60 a month. There's a vicinity that you write to, and you get 2 writers a week. And with them, Superman, the others crowd around. Oh, by the way, can I have the address of the place next to Benny Red? And where the ladies come from, please,
I have to do this every time. I have to be with your feelings about things. Use your craft. Use the sort of thing you really have to. You like
It's certainly called the perfection syndrome. Basically, everything ought to be perfect. You come up with a little alphabet for the very first time.
Yeah, it depends on who you like. Some writers can sit at a typewriter and produce any type. I can get letters, I know I believe it, but for it takes time.
I see. From the phase of I have to do everything right. You have to go, and you have to be led with your feelings about things. Use your craft. Use the sort of thing you really have to. You like. I go outside in a week, and I'm
It's certainly called the perfection syndrome. Basically, everything ought to be perfect. You come up with a little alphabet for the very first time.
Yeah, it depends on who you like. Some writers can sit at a typewriter and produce any type. I can get letters, I know I believe it, but for it takes time.
I see. To remind you how the pleasure of reading that, you have to feel that wine is priceless, or necessary. You have to control the raw material, and that material is pretty well the first.
I agree with my writing is blue polished. I was never written on writing. How I do that is a writer test, which I always do. You have to work the best around it. You have to make best you can.
It might be much more fingers right, and it's only been known to realize that from the outside reading it, and not put interest in every one of those words.
It can take a very long time to make something right, and if you get it the first time, you is really genius.
And it has to do with correctness. This isn't the same as many students and some teachers regulate writing at EBS loud calls and exercising the convenient and words of attribution.
In fact, from the very beginning, words have to be any type. I can get letters, I know I believe it, but for it takes time.
I see. To remind you how the pleasure of reading that, you have to feel that wine is priceless, or necessary. You have to control the raw material, and that material is pretty well the first.
I agree with my writing is blue polished. I was never written on writing. How I do that is a writer test, which I always do. You have to work the best around it. You have to make best you can.
It might be much more fingers right, and it's only been known to realize that from the outside reading it, and not put interest in every one of those words.
It can take a very long time to make something right, and if you get it the first time, you is really genius.
And it has to do with correctness. This isn't the same as many students and some teachers regulate writing at EBS loud calls and exercising the convenient and words of attribution.
In fact, from the very beginning, words have to be spelled correctly, that sentences have to be sentences, that the handwriting has to be correct, the punctuation has to be there, and you can't write under those conditions.
Well, unfortunately, I think far too many classes are still such that the focus is on error in writing and the errors that they've committed in writing rather than.
And it has to do with correctness. This isn't the same as many students and some teachers regulate writing at EBS loud calls and exercising the convenient and words of attribution.
In fact, from the very beginning, words have to be spelled correctly, that sentences have to be sentences, that the handwriting has to be correct, the punctuation has to be there, and you can't write under those conditions.
Well, unfortunately, I think far too many classes are still such that the focus is on error in writing and the errors that they've committed in writing rather than the successful incidences or moments of communication that they've had.
And so ideas are terribly important. It's that they are a basic in writing. They're often a basic that is ignored because people think, well, the only thing that counts in writing is that other half, which is what's written on the paper in terms of grammar, correctness, dotted I's, crossed T's, every verb correct. The only thing that counts in writing is that other half, which is what's written on the paper in terms of grammar, correctness, dotted I's, crossed T's, every verb correct.
And as a consequence, too many of the kids come into the classroom concerned and inhibited by their fear of making error. And again, unfortunately, far too much of their concern is about a mechanical error.
One of the problems that beginning writers or people who wrote before and are coming back to school to start writing again run into is they want to develop their ideas. They want to think through something on paper. But as they're doing this, they're saying to themselves, how is that word spelled? And do I put a comma here? So what we try to do now in terms of the basics is say, get your ideas down. And as you're getting your ideas down, if something troubles you, circle it, underline it, do something to key yourself that you want to come back here. But just keep going, get your ideas down and try to develop what you want to say. After that, stop, go back and start to polish and so on. Those are two very different basics. They're equally important, but they're sequential, and they can't always happen at the same time.
Fresh coffee, everyone.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
See?
Thank you. You're spoiling us, you know.
Well, that's what I've got on the form, Miss. What do you guys think?
I think you've got a good selection of quotations, Cassie, especially considering the amount of material you had to choose from.
The organization is good.
Thanks. There are three major points, really. One is that writing processes are often different.
As different as the writers themselves.
Right, and the steps and stages of writing don't just happen in any neat order, like one after the other.
It's more of a circle than a straight line.
Actually, it's more like a wheel. A wheel moves by rolling over and over on itself. The writing process moves by the steps turning over and over on themselves.
Well, my wheels were turning and my head was spinning. I studied and I wrote and I snipped and I pasted and studied and wrote and changed things.
Exactly, but Cassie, I think you mentioned 3 points. What's the final one?
Well, just that there are systematic ways of going about teaching writing to students. Well, I thought all that was clear in the tapes.
It isn't. You forgot to tell him what you told him.
What?
Tell him what you're going to tell him, then tell him what you told him. You left out the last part.
Wrong, Mr. Feldman. Jenny said to put aside any notes that didn't fit into the myths. And in my stack of discards, I found a bunch of quotes on the writing process itself.
So?
So I thought that was just as important as the myths. And I prepared another tape.
That shows enterprise, Cassie. Let's see it.
Experts on writing seem to agree that writing is a complicated process, but that there are definite phases in the writing process.
There are writing processes, and people engage in those in different ways, depending on the demands of the particular writing situation, which would include considerations for their audience, the complexity of the subject matter they're dealing with, their own familiarity with the subject matter. All of these things, I think, change the way we compose at a particular time.
We first have to have something to say, so we collect information. That's the beginning of the writing process. We collect it from our memory, working with ourselves, brainstorming, mapping, these techniques that allow us to know what we know that we didn't know we knew. Then we interview and reach out to people around us and get information, and we observe, and we get that mess of information. And then what I find out is that the experienced writers walk around that a lot.
The first thing that I think writers need to find out, to realize, is that writing is a process. That you think, you noodle around, you put some ideas down on paper, you change them about. And then when you have your planning done, and there's some strategies to help people with planning, then the writing, after that, the revising, the polishing, the changing, and so on.
Composing is a very complex process, that it involves a number of separate cognitive steps, and involves defining problems, that it involves perceiving incongruities between what one had believed and what one sees in front of one. It involves perceiving weaknesses in one's work. It involves sensing the contradiction between where one was at the end of the paper and where one wanted to be, things like that, and making revisions and making adjustments in one's writing on the basis of these perceptions.
The sequence of events in writing continue to recur. There's a kind of recursiveness in the whole process, and I want my students to begin to realize that they need to go back in order to go forward. And even people who talk about the writing process now say, well, now we're going to do the pre-writing stage, and then we're going to do the writing stage, and now we're going to do the rewriting stage, and they don't recognize that all of those, what they call stages, are not really stages, but just moments or subroutines that we need to engage in all the time during writing.
Although the experts don't agree on what to call the stages in the writing process, they do agree on some important points.
If we can convey to students our own belief, I truly believe that writing is a matter of touching somebody and changing our environment. We are not powerless if we can write. We can change things.
Writing is a complex process, that it takes time to learn. It is difficult to learn, but that it can be learned through continued practice and guidance with perceptive teachers. But it can't be learned if you think there's a formula. Think there's a simple plan.
The whole notion of the writer symbolizing or creating the world is what we're talking about here, because the writer does not just receive, but actually shapes the world by the perspectives that he or she creates during the process of writing.
Good job.
Well done, Cassie.
You still need to sum up your main points. Oh, and I'm sure it's still too long.
I've already cut it to the bone.
Oh, that's what you think now. Let it rest for a couple of days and then take another look at it.
You mean make a revision?
You'll be surprised what you will find to delete and to add.
Okay, you're right. I just wish they'd started teaching writing like this earlier. I might have begun to write sooner.
You know, if we use Cassie's piece, the footage we shot in the schools with the writing process at work would fit in very nicely.
Yes, all right, let's have a look at it. Cassie, would you mind?
Sure.
Thank you.
This afternoon, we'll meet in writing groups again, so writing groups go to your regular places of meeting with your chairpersons.
Can writing really be taught as a process to students in the classroom? The answer is yes. The writing process is alive and well throughout the educational system. It has seen many developments over the years, and students are applying it in elementary schools, high schools, and colleges all across the country.
I think the most important thing out of many important things is that they learn to be aware in a very real way about what the writing process is.
Okay, I liked how you put the, the beep beep for the beginning of the rom-com.
So that they sit down and write with interest and confidence. And then they know that that's not finished. They've used that first draft to get the thoughts out. Then they began to reach out for help and response to shape what they have.
I like the way you said, Willem jumped up and started punching you.
The difference between a writer of whatever age, whether that's 10 or 16 or whatever, if that person doesn't write with the image of a reader in mind, that writing may be mechanically correct, but it will be either a wooden piece or an unclear piece, and maybe even a disorganized piece, because they haven't thought about what the needs of a reader are.
Let's have Gabriel.
The feeling was deep inside of me. This feeling which had been built up for days now.
But these kids already are writing for one another. They're using one another for fix-up, which is just a kid word for revision. They're using one another to help shape a piece of writing, and it's being shaped to meet the needs of a reader.
Something that's coming through particularly clearly and effectively, something that's taking your attention for any reason whatsoever.
What I do in my class is get a strong sense of seeing in the mind going, and a strong sense of the levels of audience that are open to the student. One person in the semicircle, a very direct sense of address. 3 people in the semicircle, a small mixed audience. Everyone in the semicircle, which includes me, a strong sense of audience. And out of seeing in the mind, a strong sense of audience, then comes the content, subject matter, context, sense of the form, and all those other things that tie inexperienced writers into thousands of knots.
I think the major change in the teaching of writing, and perhaps the most important one, is a realization on teachers' parts, because they have become involved in writing themselves, that writing is a complex and extended process, that it's not simply a process of putting down your ideas on paper and then immediately polishing them and editing them, but rather that writing is a way of discovering what you want to say, and then through a series of working with response groups or editing groups, finding out and clarifying what you want to say. So perhaps the most important thing is the extension of the writing process, so that it's not considered a cut and dried quick thing, but rather it's a process that has many stages.
As I was walking away, I could still smell the sweet smell of grass.
That's a really useful piece. But one thing troubles me.
What's that?
Well, we've seen how the writing process works in the classroom. But by now our telecourse students must be wondering how this process will work for them alone at home.
Well, one way is to try to imagine their audience and anticipate their reaction, and the other way is to read what they've written out loud.
To yourself?
Oh, well, if you can find someone to listen to you, that may be even better. Could be a child or a spouse or a friend. Here, I've got something here we should listen to. I think this will fit in very nicely. Would you mind, Cassie?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Without the immediate context of a classroom, you have to get somebody else to read your writing. You have to do that. If you can get them to read it aloud, just listening to the way they read it aloud can be informative to you. If they stumble, if they hesitate in ways that you didn't mean to, that may tell you something important. Just listen to the sound of their voice. Does the emphasis fall where you want it? If not, it's probably not their fault. It may be your fault. That's one suggestion. The other thing is not only to get people to read it aloud, but to react to it, to respond to it. And here, the most important thing is to remember that people will respond in ways that you don't expect, maybe that you don't like. Someone will say, I had this reaction to your writing, and you'll think, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And the immediate natural response is to try to talk them out of it. Say, no, your response is wrong. Don't do that. Don't do that. Listen to what they're saying and try to see why they saw it that way. Usually when I can quit being defensive and listen to people and try to see things from their point of view, it usually turns out that there's something funny in my writing. And if I'll think about what they're saying, I can go back and fill in a gap, make a connection, make something explicit in a way that wasn't there before. I suppose part of what I'm saying is even what may strike you as a dumb or insensitive reading may turn out to be very, very useful. But don't get defensive. Listen to your reader.
That's it, Cassie.
Well, it's hard not to feel defensive sometimes. I felt really under the gun today.
Well, looks like you're still alive to me.
I am, and I've learned something too.
What's that?
Well, I was really upset when I started out because everything seemed so disorganized, a real mess.
Writing is messy. At times.
And some writers are messier than others.
Yes, they are, and it works.
I guess that's the point I'm getting at. See, writing is not just a set of rules. It's more of a process.
Mm-hmm. And there are lots of ways to go about it.
Right, and it's not how you go about it. It's where you wind up that counts.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project.